Welcome to this week's episode of the St. Augustine Chronicles, the where, the who, and the how'd they get there. This morning, I'm so pleased to have my friend Phil McDaniel in with me. I know that most of you probably know Phil from his work with the St. Augustine Distillery, but I think Phil has a really interesting story leading up to what he became involved with the distillery. So, Phil, you weren't born here, were you?
No, I feel like I was. But,
How long have you been here?
20, almost 30 years, about 27 years. So it's been a
What
long
brought
time.
you here?
Vacation, like so many people. Wendy and I had come up to St. Augustine for on and off for about 10 years. We used to vacation at St. Augustine Beach and just fell in love with the town. And we said, why don't we move there?
Where did you come from?
So most immediately before that, we were in Miami Beach. We had been in Miami for about 12 years. Wendy and I are both originally from the Northeast. She's from the New York area. I'm from New York and Boston area, so we're both North New Englanders. But I think we were in our mid-20s when we made it down to South Florida.
Just to get away from the snow and...
You know, it's funny. Her brother had gone to the University of Miami, and my in-laws had an apartment down there that was vacant. And we had just started dating, and we were like, well, let's get away from the cold, and we never left. So it was great. Yeah.
That's the story of most Floridians.
Yeah.
We came, we saw, we never left.
Correct. Sand in our toes, as they say.
So you were in Miami, and then you visited St. Augustine and said, this is better than Miami. I'm going to move here.
Yeah, we had really wonderful friends. Jan Master, who was a longtime St. Augustine resident. She had Yo Ho Ho Beach Shop, and her first husband, Bruce Collinger. We became friends in Miami when we met doing a trade show down there. And at the time, they were living in DeLand, and they said, hey, we're going to go check out this cool, beach town, St. Augustine. And they wound up moving here, and then we're like, you guys should come and check it out. So we started coming up, and at that time, I had an import-export company. I was doing a lot of work with convenience stores and gas industry, which was my first, real career. And so I would bring Wendy and the kids up here and then fly over to Asia for 2-3 weeks, do my business, and then come back. So it was like a summer routine for us for many years, and we said, this is just such a cool place. The beaches are beautiful and all that stuff. So
yeah, I think that's what brings most people here. It's such an easy place to live, right? It's laid back, but it's kind of funky cool, and you have people from all over who are interesting, and you just realize, where else are you going to find this? It's so unique here.
It truly is. I mean, if you think about it, there's no place. Well, maybe in Pensacola, but there's no place else in Florida that has the architecture and the real history here. Most of Florida was developed in the last 100 years, and most of it in the last 50 years, and it's all the same. And what makes St. Augustine so, I think, unique is not only its beach and its town and its people, but its architecture and history. And I think it's created an intense pride for those of us who've lived here for a long time. And it's been a great ride.
So when you moved here, you were still working in your career doing import-export?
Yeah, exactly. I had a company called U.S. Import and Promotions Company, and we worked specifically with the 7-Elevens of the world and the Sunocos and the Shells and all that. And basically, we designed and developed what they call consumer promotions. There was back in the day when you would buy gasoline, and they would say, "Hey, buy a tank of mid-grade or premium and get this great Dolphins mug," or get a toy truck or whatever it was. We designed and developed and then fulfilled a lot of those. So it was a pretty interesting niche business, and did that from, probably actually the late 80s until we sold the company in 2001.
So you probably weren't here that much when you first moved here. Your family was here, but you probably weren't.
Well, what was interesting is we moved here, and a couple of years after we moved here, our company was acquired in 98, and I was commuting back and forth to Los Angeles, where the company who bought us was. So I was back and forth to LA quite a bit.
That's a haul.
It was a haul, and then I was also, when I wasn't there, I was working with my clients. 7-Eleven was based in Dallas. Speedway Super America was based in Enid, Ohio. BP was in Cleveland. Amoco was in Chicago. So I was kind of all over the place.
So you never knew what time zone you were in?
Not very often, but I had a lot of frequent flyer miles, which I still need to use.
Yeah, my husband had a global career, and it was tough.
Yeah.
Those transcontinental flights, or even the across the country, it's really difficult to do that. And I have a good friend who travels a lot, and boy, it wears on you. So
Well, I was doing all that pre 9/11, and I got, I mean, very fortunate in that, like, I stopped traveling in June of 2001, and then obviously it was very shortly after that.
yeah, it's not fun anymore. I mean, it wasn't
No,
fun then, but now it's really not fun.
it just changed, the whole culture. And when I wasn't traveling in the United States, I was over in Asia 3 times a year,
Right.
so it was a lot.
So I'm guessing that while you probably loved it here, you didn't really get to know it here until you left that company.
It's really insightful, and it was just enough to keep the business going and take care of Wendy and have her take care of me, and we have 4 beautiful children who we raised while we were here. And so no, I had very little community involvement. I would say the one community project that I was involved in um, during that time period in 1997 was Project Swing, which I had worked with Mike Davis and Les Thomas and a whole host of wonderful community people. But it's an interesting story with that.
Yeah, tell me about Project Swing, which for those of you who don't know, Project Swing is the park right next to the parking garage, the city's parking garage, in Francis Field.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't always there. It's been there for so long that most people who've moved here recently think it's been there forever. But you were instrumental in creating that.
It was funny.
What's the story behind that?
So, how much time have you got? It was a project of kind of interesting necessity, and at the time we were living downtown, very close to the park, and there was some discussion about putting in and paving a significant amount of what was then the Red Cox Park, and this, what's now what people know as the special events field. It used to be baseball fields, and that's where all the kids played, and it was this big, public green space. And there was some, need, as there always is, for more parking. And there was an initiative to take a large part of that park, almost past the tennis courts that Flagler had, and pave that. And at the time,
Oh
I
my
had
gosh.
no understanding or no interest in tourism, which is now a completely different perspective for me. So I have full respect for both. But it became, it was a big, kind of a political issue. It was a hot button. And at that time, I was very residentially focused, and I worked with a number of people, including Les and others, to kind of have a conversation with the city and the merchants at that time to say, hey, look, what do you need? And ultimately they said, well, we really need about 450 parking spaces. And this is all pre-garage. And so Les said, well, I think I could draw 450 spaces, but not use that whole surface area. I think we could be pretty efficient with it. And I want to say Greg Baker was the mayor at the time, and we had about 350 people outside City Hall. And it was a really hot meeting.
Wow.
And Greg was there. I think Len probably was the mayor or vice mayor or something at the time. And there were a number of them. And long story short is they said, okay, as long as you can draw something that will give us 450 spaces, that'll be enough. So Les compacted that space, drew what was now the footprint to the garage. And it left this, piece of land, and a bunch of us were talking, and we said, we should probably try and preserve some of that. And we were just chatting, and I had visited my mom down in Vero Beach around that time, and they had just finished doing this community playground build by a company called Leathers and Associates. It was this beautiful wooden playground, really, really cool. And I asked my mom, I'm like, where did this thing come from? She goes, oh, it was a really cool community project. We just did it. So I called the city manager of Vero Beach, and I said, hey, how did this happen? And he said, oh, we worked with this firm in upstate New York, Leathers and Associates. They're in Ithaca. I can give you a contact there, and they were great to work with. It took about a year. The community comes together, and they build it in a week. It was really kind of a miracle. So I was really excited. I brought that back, and I talked to Les, and I talked to Mike, who's a dear friend of mine, and we pitched the idea to, I think Mr. Pomar was the city manager at that time, and that was interesting. But we got
Did they initially go for it, or was there opposition?
there was originally some opposition, but I think once we said, look, all we need is the land. We'll raise the money, we'll do the labor, we'll get the materials. You don't have to do a thing. It's not going to cost the city anything. Just give us the dirt, and you can own it. We'll build the asset. It'll be worth $500,000 to the city, and it'll be a needed, recreation space for kids and
Right.
visitors.
Right.
And we sold it in, and they bought it. And then for a year, we raised the money. I think we raised $500,000 in cash, and we organized. There was just everybody in the community came out, and anybody who's out there listening who remembers it or was part of it, it was a really, really special time. And the community came together, and in 1 week, it went from a flat, unpaved surface to a finished, stained, ready-to-use playground. It was one of the best projects I've ever been involved in.
I think the fact that you can bring community together is almost more important than the final result. The final result is lasting, and it's a great location now because I picture when I had little kids, if there was a parking garage somewhere and a really great park right next door to that, I would probably have either let the kids play there before we went wherever or after we're done. The incentive would be once we're done, if you behave,
Yep.
we'll let you go play at that park. So it's actually a perfect location for kids to just be kids
It was
after long car rides or before long car
right,
rides, right?
and
But
yeah,
but it's the coming together of the community that's really what the win is on projects like that.
what was so cool about the way Leathers put this together is they said, look, everybody needs to be involved, and they came down from multiple planning sessions, and they would even go into local elementary schools to have the kids draw and design the aesthetics of what they wanted the things to be. So the kids took ownership, and then they would get the parents involved. And then even on the week of the build, they would have kids come in. Troy, actually, at the time, was I want to say he was running the daycare program at Ketterlinas, and he was responsible for organizing all the kids. And we had the kids there for like hours soaping every screw so the screws could go into the wood quicker. So they're saying, well, I'm helping build it too. So it was this beautiful involvement with the kids. We worked with the sheriff's department. They brought out some guys who were doing their time in the county jail, and they came in and volunteered. They loved to get out. And we had firefighters and police and old folks and young folks, and it was just a magical moment of bringing this community together because the common denominator was kids.
Right.
And it was playing,
Right.
which
And
all
public
of us
space.
have done, and public space. And it was really like, hey, this is for the kids. And there were ways that individuals and businesses could, involve financially. We went from, big companies could buy, an entire element of the playground for $2,500 or whatever, all the way down to you could have your name engraved on one of the pickets on the fence for $30. And we sold hundreds of those. And if anybody, gets over there and walks in the playground, go look at all of the pickets on the fence on the inside of the playground, and you'll see all these names. And it was a wonderful project.
And then wasn't there a fire after it was built?
Yeah.
And you had to rebuild it.
Yeah, I want to say, I remember I was with Wendy and we were traveling. It was in the winter, and I got a call from Mike Davis, and it was, I don't know, I think it was in January. Something was very cold, and don't know what happened. I'm not sure what the cause, but there was a fire, and we had to go back and rebuild part of it. And, it was down for a month, but, we came together, the city
So you
pitched
did
in,
it again.
and we did it again. Yeah,
Good for you, Phil.
yeah, it was fun. It was great.
And then after you did Project Swing, you did Project Skate.
Yeah, what was really interesting was I think that when the community saw that you could come together and build something really special like Swing, and it really, and by the way, Swing, before we move on, I want to tip my hat to my friend Vic Moline, wherever you are on this planet or in the afterlife. He came up with that name, and he goes, I have the perfect name. I said, what is this? It's Project Swing. I said, what does Swing stand for? And he said, St. Augustine's wish for its next generation.
Oh, I didn't even know that was an acronym. I just thought it was Swing because it was a park. Oh, interesting.
So that was great. I had to get that in. So not long after that, probably 2 years after that, I got a phone call from my good friend Bill Hamilton, who said, hey, I've got Mac McLeod, and I think the Baileys. There were a bunch of people whose families at that time had kids who were starting to skateboard, and there really was no place for them to do that. And he said, would you want to help us, work on that and lead that? And I played a much minor role in that than I did in Swing, but I attribute Project Swing to kind of being the catalyst to give people, the vision that said, hey, the community can work with government
We can do it.
to create things. Because if you leave it up to the government to do it on its own, sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't. But if it's a public-private partnership where the county or the city or the state, whoever, sees that the community wants to do it and they're willing to put skin in the game, whether it's time or money, things happen. And I would encourage the next generation of young families to not overlook that, because I really do believe that if you see a need for the community and you're willing to work and you're willing to, provide some support, whatever that is, you can do some things. It's really cool.
Well, and I think it's just more impactful and more meaningful when you have some ownership in something versus the city or the county or whatever municipality just gives it to you.
Correct.
And, there's the benefit to hard work, right? You put a little sweat equity into something, you're going to feel differently about it.
Well, and that was getting back to Swing. The thing that made it so great is the kids took really good care of it because they helped build it. And if anybody started, swinging too crazy on the things, they would say, "Hey, be cool. That's my playground."
Oh, that's so
So
cool.
yeah, so there's definitely ownership there, which is really great. We did another project with Greg White. I don't know if you know Greg. You should definitely interview him. He's one of my heroes in the town. But he had approached me several years after this to help do a public art project. They were just beginning to build the Solomon Calhoun Center. Greg, for years, had advocated for that. Again, an individual working with the county to try and make something happen, and they did it. And they wanted to do a public art project with the kids. And he knew that Wendy, my wife, did tile and mosaic, and so we put those two together, and they wound up doing this beautiful mosaic that's on the other side of the wall that says Solomon Calhoun Center. If you ever drive around that turnaround there. And what was really cool was he said the kids who were there had never done anything like that. And these are kids in West Augustine that are obviously, had some tough times in their lives. And he said afterwards the kids were like, "That's my wall. Don't you touch it. Don't you mess with it." So when you get them involved, they can absolutely, be proud of it. And it's something they can, help put their name on.
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
100%.
So Project Swing you dealt with the city government. Project Skate would have been county government, correct?
Correct. And again, most of the sort of leadership and organization was done by some other folks. We've helped financially, and we provided some counsel for them. But yeah, that relationship existed between St. Johns County because it's out at Treaty Park, which is off of Old Moultrie. And I want to say it took probably a year, 2 years to build. They work with Team Payne, who's one of the best skate park designers in the country, and they came in and put in this big, beautiful bowl, and it was a great project.
And it was needed because there wasn't any place.
No, and I for a while, unfortunately, skating was kind of this new thing that people were afraid of, and it was dark, and these, reckless kids and all that.
The culture was so bad. It was
these are kids. These are kids just wanting to do what they do, and so the parents obviously saw a need for that, and they made it happen. So there was definitely a need, and there was a continuing need. I want to say probably another 6 or 7 years later. The city, understandably, had been, kind of concerned about some of the damages that were happening to some of the downtown historic properties, particularly on the Cuba line and stuff. Kids were skating, on the north end of St. George Street by Orange Street.
But again, because they didn't really have a place close by to do that.
That's right.
It's not that they wanted to do something wrong. They just needed a place.
They needed a place.
And they couldn't necessarily get to Treaty Park.
And it's not like you can skate, on Avenida Menendez or St. George or down the Bridge of Lions. I mean, there is no formal place for kids to skate. So one of the parents, Damon Douglas, who works out at the county now, had approached me, and he said, "Hey, would you help me, maybe lead a way, because my kids are getting in trouble, and it's killing their self-esteem. They're getting their skateboards taken away. They're feeling like, criminals. It's really, it's unfortunate. And if they just had a place to skate that was walkable, we could do that." And so, again, having nothing but time and energy and passion, I picked up the phone and called my friend Bill Harris, who at the time was city manager.
And Bill had to go, "Oh, Phil."
Bill.
Here we go again, Phil.
Well, Bill's famous saying was, don't put a screaming, stinking monkey on my back or something like that. I don't know what it is. He was always like, it's not my problem. But I said, "Hey, Bill, this really is something that we need to do." Project Skate was very successful. The kids at the county have a place, but their moms have to drive them.
Right.
And it'd be nice to have kids in town to do that. We don't have any place for it. I said, "Come on, man, you got to come up with a place." And he said, No. I said, "Well, hey, you're building a parking garage. How about, putting the skate park on the top deck of the garage? How cool would that be? It would be an attraction for the city." And he went nuts, and he was kind of flustered by the idea. And I'll never forget it. He said, "I'm going to check with our structural engineers, but I don't think it can handle the weight." I'm like, it can't handle the weight.
The weight of a 40-pound kid.
Right. So that got shot to hell.
So, word to the wise, do not park on the top floor of the parking garage because it couldn't handle skaters.
Not true. But we, being in classic Bill, he was a little bit, kind of no. But then, of course, being the very generous man he was, he said, "Look, let me try and come up with a solution." And I said,
but isn't that interesting, Phil, that you you saw that the first answer when you're dealing with a government official, and I'm not trying to single out
Sure.
any one
Yeah,
person,
yeah.
but the first answer to government
Mm-hmm.
from government is no, we can't do that, or no, we don't. I
Yeah.
think that people who come from the private sector, and especially you running a company, you have to think outside the box. You have to get creative. You have to make things happen because your company requires
Yeah.
that, right? It's a different mentality. And again, I'm not critical of any one
Sure.
person, but
Right.
it's just a different kind of
Well,
thought process when you're in government.
yeah, because on one hand, and I'll defend the government right now. And one of the challenges that you have if you are a public servant and you're an employee of a city or municipality, county, you are a steward for the public dollars,
Right.
right? So you
Right.
have that, and then you also have the risk
Right.
because it's not just about, hey, we don't want to spend that money. It's like, wait a minute, what if we spend that money and then something happens and we
Right.
could get sued?
Right.
So they're
Yeah.
always very, very concerned, understandably, about not getting too far ahead with things. So I think part of the key to working, with a local or city or state government is to understand that from the foundation,
Right.
which I was fortunate enough to do, and approach them to say, hey, look, this could be a win-win, and here's how. And again, Bill just said, we don't have any money. There's nothing in the budget. I said, we will find, just like we did with Project Scape, we will raise the money. Do not worry about it. I'll find
He
a way
should
to
have
make
known
it
that
happen.
argument wasn't going anywhere.
So he said, yeah. He said, let me think about it. And then, he said, you know what? We've got this kind of funny, piece of property across the street across the street from the fire station over on Anastasia Island, across the street from the alligator farm and up the road from the lighthouse. It's just this kind of vacant property that the county owns. And, if you want to use that, check it out. There's some environmental issues. We got to fix that out. And I said, okay. So we checked it out. And it was perfect. And so we set about the task of saying, okay, how do we go raise the money? How are we going to do it? And at that time, the county was doing quite well financially, and there was more state money. There were more grants being offered, and I was very, very lucky to reunite with one of my classmates from Vero Beach High School, a woman named Shorty Robbins. Shorty at that time was the director, the assistant director, I think, for the county Parks and Rec, and she was awesome. And one of the things Shorty really excelled at was the ability to write grants. And she wrote a state grant that I think generated like 100 or 150. And then we approached the county, and Karen Stern, who I know you just talked to recently, was a county commissioner at that time. And I knew Karen personally, and she said, well, maybe we can find a little matching money in the county government. And then I think even the city stepped up, and then we raised a bunch privately. But I want to say we raised 300,000 or 400,000 for that project. And Tori Strange, we actually ran out of money towards the end, and Tori from the surf station did an amazing thing. He said, look, we need another 50,000. He said, I'll put that money up and pay. And it was a really wonderful project.
And it's so close to his shop, too.
It was perfect. I mean, obviously there's some benefit to him there, but the important thing is, again, it took the community to kind of get it done. And we met with the neighbors in the Lighthouse Park area. They were very concerned, and we said, no.
I remember there was noise concerns.
There was, and
maybe some others, but I remember the noise
noise
concerns.
was definitely a concern because the sound of the skating, lighting, and all that stuff. And so we said, hey, there's going to be no lighting. It'll only be daylight hours only. And we wound up having to raise another $50,000 or $75,000 to put in a landscape berm that would basically deflect the sound up and over. And so those there's like 4 or 5 homes that are behind the park. Flamingo, I think, is the street. And we met with them, and ultimately, and again, I got to give amazing props to our city manager, because John came in and he knew what we were trying to do, and he said, you know what, let me help you do some community engagement. And he, as he masterfully does, kind of worked with the community to understand and address the issues, and did his thing, and we got it done. So it was another wonderful, happy ending park, and it had no name. And then when Hamilton Upchurch had passed, the city had approached us, and they said, how would you feel about naming after Hamilton? I'm like, absolutely. So that was a big honor, to have the park named after Mr. Upchurch, who gave so much to this community.
Yeah, his legacy and his family still
correct.
giving.
No, 100%. So it was great. So we've been really lucky. So yeah, those are just some of the fun things I've had.
I feel like that park actually benefits also from the fire station, the county fire station there. It seems to me like firemen being right next to that park gives it a sense of safeness and structure, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that they're over there policing it by any means, but I just feel like being right next to a fire station is is helpful for that location.
No, absolutely. I think it's twofold. One, it's just for the parents to say, hey, I want to make sure it doesn't get out of control there.
Exactly.
So I think
There's
that did it.
something there.
The other thing that to me made it so logical is that here you have these EMTs who are prepared to help in any,
Good point. I didn't think of
emergency,
that.
right? Now somebody kid falls, and which people are known to do when they skate, and they can help those kids. I don't know how often that's happened, but no, you're absolutely right. I think the proximity of that was great. The fact that it's walkable to town and stuff, it's a wonderful spot. It was one of the many joys I've had living here, and I've always been a believer, Karen, that in the course of your life, if you are in a position to, giving back is important, because sort of three things. Number one is you don't live forever. Number two is whatever you have, you can't take it with you. And number three is if you can leave your community a little better than you found it, and we all do that, we're going to be okay as a place. And I learned that lesson early as a camper, and I was always like, well, make sure you leave your campsite a little bit cleaner for the next guy. And that stuck with me, throughout my life. And so, particularly after I retired and sold my first company and had some time and a little bit of financial resources, not a lot, I felt like it was it was my time. I was like, look, I had the good fortune to make a little bit of money, and I had some time. I could help Wendy raise the kids, and like you, being an A-type, I couldn't just sit. And so getting involved in some things really gave me personal satisfaction.
Do you skate?
I don't.
Because you helped build two skate
I helped
parks.
build 2 skate parks. My son didn't skate. I just knew that it was the right thing, but I do surf. If I'm going to fall, I want to fall in the water.
Yeah, I think that's a lot better.
not on concrete, but I have
I've
great
snowboarded,
respect.
and that can be a little tricky too.
Right, yeah. Soft landings.
Soft snow's good,
Much
hard
better.
snow's not.
Correct, exactly.
So you also got involved with the St. Augustine Amphitheater, which is
Yeah.
just a fantastic, fantastic facility that we have here.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
amazing.
I was kind of again, for that 10-year period when I had stopped working at my first company and before we started the distillery, I just had time, in my hand, and I was like a sharpshooter saying, okay, what can I do now? How can I get involved and do something fun?
Did people come to you with these projects because they knew you had a history of helping?
Yeah, generally.
So you weren't out trying to identify them
No,
yourself?
and just a quick aside, I really have to give, thanks and props to a guy named Jim Baltzell. I don't know if you remember Jim. But Jim was the publisher of the record back in the early 2000s, and he was a dear friend. And he saw me just like kind of a one-man wrecking crew, wanting to do good things in the community. He said, "Really, Philip, you should get involved in the county's leadership program. Take part in that chamber program." He said, "I'll nominate you, and you should do it because it'll give you a chance to meet a bunch of people, and you'll better understand the county, and those connections and relationships will help you as you try and do good in the community." And it was so wonderful. One of the people who's in my graduating class that year was Joe Joyner, and Joe had just moved up from Orange County, and he and I spent 8 days together, and you spend these full days in the bus, and you travel all over the county, do things, and we got to know each other. And one of the things that really, helped solidify Joe and I was our love of children and education. And I was very fortunate to have a good listener in Joe, and somebody who understood it. And he and I worked together with a number of other people, but we were kind of the catalyst team to get the Center for the Arts started at St. Augustine High School, as well as the middle school later at Murray.
And you have a daughter who was a dancer, correct?
Well, all of our kids at the time, there were no
Wendy's
options.
Career.
Well, yeah, my wife's an artist, but there was no option for an arts program when we were here then, and so we commuted and transported our kids up to Jacksonville to Douglas Anderson, which is a wonderful world-class, full-on performing arts high school. And I just kept pounding Joe. I'm like, we need a DA here, we need a DA here, and he said, whoa, we don't have the money, we don't have the resources. And as it turned out, there was a model in I think Sarasota, Florida, called the Gibbs High School, and I had heard about it. And he said, why don't you go check it out, and if it makes sense, maybe we can make it work.
Sarasota's got such a huge arts community.
Yeah, and we went over there, and it was fantastic. And I came back and brought back, hey, we could do a school within a school. And that was right around the time Joe was looking at creating these academies.
Mm-hmm.
So you had a business academy,
Mm-hmm.
and you had technical academy and all these things. And he said, you know what, I think we could fit that in. It would make sense in this bigger plan. And so, absolutely to his credit, he said, let's make it happen. So we worked with Jeff Dodd, who at the time was the lead arts
Still there.
teacher.
Yeah,
And
fantastic.
Jeff went from, being a music teacher and all that stuff that he was doing to being the director of the Center for the Arts. And we worked extensively with him. I had hired and engaged at the time Jane Condon, who was the former principal at DA, and Jackie Cornelius, who was the principal at DA at that time, and I said, can you come down and consult St. Johns County? And they did, and they really helped to formulate some programming there. So that was another thing. It was about a 2-year project, but that was wonderful. But getting back to the amphitheater, I was close with Ron Sanchez, who was about to get elected as a county commissioner, and there was some real discussion about how the amphitheater was going to be run, what was going to be the management of it. And at that time, the county was pretty far down the path of having it run by a private company. And when I met the people who were going to run it, I really got the sense that it was going to be it would be less community involved, and there wouldn't be nearly as much as community engagement and support as I had hoped. At that time, I had kind of stepped in as a volunteer director for the Cultural Council and knew that the cultural community needed a place to have venues and use it's a public facility. It was a triple public asset in the sense that it was a state park, it was a county piece of property, and it was money that the county had used to build it. And prior to that, I think it was the Lions or one of the nonprofits, I can't remember, had actually built the original amphitheater. It was done by I think it was done by David Drisdale and some of the old families to create the original amphitheater. Was there to house the Cross and Sword, which was the original state play in the early 60s. And so there was this huge legacy of a public investment in the fact that the county was going to put up its money to they put like 9 or 10 million in it to take it from the shambles that it was into this beautiful performing arts center. It really needed to have a good management team, and I felt like that the company who was going to run it didn't share that same vision, and so I kind of jumped in and said, hey, we need to take a look at this. And at that time, there was kind of going to be a change in power of commissioners, and I had worked with Ron Sanchez and some others, and they said, well, we agree, and through a series of things, they said, hey, would you help lead a team to figure out how to manage the amphitheater? We know we built it, but we don't know the first thing about running it. What are our options? And so I worked with Tom Bledsoe, who was involved in the Cultural Council with me, and Ron Sanchez, who had been a music promoter in his past, and a number of other people, and we put together a volunteer team on our own money, not the county's. We went all over the Southeast. We went to Ocala. We went down to Miami. We went to Boca. We went up to Chastain Park in Atlanta, and we interviewed these different operators and say, what was your structure? And we came back with what we felt was going to be the right model for St. Johns County, which was to have it run as a division of the county, as opposed to having it being a for-profit. And it obviously it is what it is today. And
I agree with you. It would have totally changed it had it been a for-profit company running
100%. The contract that was written at that time basically said the operator was going to be guaranteed profit whether they made money or lost money, and all of that onus was going to come back.
What a great concept for a business owner.
It was perfect for them.
I'd love to have that.
And I saw that, and I
owner.
go, as a taxpayer, I'm not too happy about that. And just more personally, as an advocate for the arts at that time, I really felt that we could do better. And so we got the amphitheater up and running, and then the county ran it, and obviously here it is today.
And I think it's become even more of a county, or not a county, but a public participation venue since. Pat Canan sponsors a little side venue there, and we've got the farmers market there. And so people in the community and the volunteers, a lot of volunteers are there, people in the community have really embraced that, which is wonderful because it is an amazing facility. I will say, though, Jerry Dixon always used to tell me that there should have been a parking garage there, and he had one designed in his head for it. So I hope someday they consider first floor, he thought, could be perhaps a covered farmer's market and even expand that.
Sure.
We wouldn't have to worry about rain.
I mean, that's certainly a good idea. I mean, I think the goal was to get it open. There was a certain amount of money, and the question would have become to build a $3 or $4 million parking garage. Who would have kicked all that stuff?
Right. But
and it's not like a garage.
I think he had a point.
Well, I think he did too. The issue becomes is that that venue. I love you, Jerry. That venue is used not nearly with the same frequency as the venue downtown, right? I mean, because the parking garage downtown, you have visitors coming, 24/7, 365 days a year. The amphitheater, it's a classic peak demand. I mean, you may have 6 events a month, and when there's an event, it's jammed. But the other 25 days, it's empty. So how do you amortize that, and how do you pay for it? So, well, I think one day. But the thing that I'm most proud about is the team. That there's we have a number of management teams who kind of helped. I usher in its success, and it's continued to get better year after year after year.
Oh, absolutely.
But their insistence and their commitment to making sure this is truly a community asset, to bring in the farmers market, to be able to offer it for high school graduations, to do all the kind of fundraising and opportunities that they do, and allow local bands to sing out loud festival where they
Right,
have
to sing out
stages.
loud. Yeah.
All those things. I just get so excited because they really executed what the original vision of the Cultural Council was.
Yeah, that's where I think
and
a
they're doing great
for-profit
job.
would not have done that. And I remember when Jack Johnson came and they had to
Mhm.
make some changes to their
Yeah.
recycling program to be
Right.
more eco-friendly. I don't see a private company really being interested in doing that.
It wouldn't add to the bottom line. And they'd say, well, that's just Jack Johnson. It's one concert. But, when Murphy and Gabe were doing that, it was like, no, we have a chance to get Jack Johnson, the only venue he's ever going to perform at in the state of Florida when he hasn't performed in so long, to come to St. Augustine. Oh, and by the way, we have to do the right thing.
Right. We can make ourselves better.
Let's do that. And
Yeah.
so having people like Gabe Pellissier and Ryan Murphy, who were the ones who really, really cared about the community, because they have young families and they see the future. That's what makes the difference. And you would never get that in a private company. You just
Yeah.
wouldn't, because they would
I
be all
agree.
about the bottom line.
Yeah, I agree. So I know you've had some other community projects, but
Sure.
I want to talk just a little bit before we're done about the distillery.
Sure.
Because I find it really interesting that someone decides to start a distillery. That cannot be an easy thing to get off the ground. And I know your history of getting things off the ground, but that distillery idea, to me, you've got state and federal regulations in addition to you're in a historic building, the former ice plant, which I know comes with quite a few strings attached.
Yeah.
I think about what it took to start that, and it just seems to me that it was an overwhelming project, and you did it.
Yeah, we had a great team. We had a lot of people who helped make it happen. But, more than anything else, I've just learned in the course of my life, persistence is really key, And, if you have a wall in front of you, you figure, okay, well, do I go under it? Do I go around it? Do I hop over it? How do we get past that barrier? And I think any good, business or business person, it's just part of their DNA. So I was just very lucky. It was an extremely challenging project. And again, I could probably come back and do whole show just on what it took to get it done, but it was 3 years of a lot of risk. I was renting that building for almost 2 years before I even knew if I was going to get the land from Florida Power and Light, and that was really the biggest thing. And the other thing that very few people know is that the people who own the building, there were two married couples that actually had bought that building to put the previous business in, which made movie projection equipment. And when technology changed, their business, flatlined, and they had this building, and two of the couples, one had left town and moved to South Carolina. Another couple had gotten divorced. And so literally I spent a year doing therapy and real estate management.
Yeah,
And what was
being
wild,
in real estate, I
Yeah.
understand.
what was so wild, you'll appreciate this as a realtor, Karen, what was so kind of effed up about the whole thing was that when I went to talk to them, I would talk to one couple and they'd say, well, this is the listing broker. And then I go to talk to another couple and they go, no, actually he has the broker. I'm like, well, then who am I
bloody supposed to be talking with?
It was crazy.
Yeah.
And so
Welcome to
it
my world.
just took, and so it took just a lot of effort to get those people to see the light. The one person had back taxes they had to owe the other, and there was just a lot of estrangement. And there was a time where I was like, this isn't worth it. But, we stuck with it, and I really saw the potential for the building because it was really the only place where you could do, a distillery on the scale, what we wanted to. And really, I have to give so much credit to Charles Cox at the winery and, his encouragement and support along the way, because it was really what we did was take, a building that was within 2 blocks of what Charles did, and the way he and his family brought that building back to life. We did the same thing, and with our partners at the ice plant next door, they set about doing the restaurant, we set about doing the distillery, and it really turned out to be a wonderful project. So, but it was a lot.
But you've had to advocate at a state and even a federal level now, which has to be incredibly frustrating. And it seems to me like there again, the argument is just do the right thing. And it seems so commonsensical to do what you're asking them to do, particularly when I think the market wants small batch products.
Yeah. That's again, we could do a whole separate show on that one. One of the things, none of us had any idea where we were, the water waters we were wading into.
Which is good, because you probably wouldn't have done it, right?
For sure, I wouldn't have done it. But it's this issue of a regulated industry, because you're dealing with it's the only commodity, I think, in the entire U.S. economy which, by laws dating back to Prohibition, I can't sell to you directly as a consumer unless you visit my shop. I can't ship it to you. You can't go online right now, where everybody in the United States and the planet is ordering everything from Amazon because they don't leave their home.
Exactly.
You can't do that with my product because of these crazy old laws, and they're state laws, not federal. And so you have this weird distribution system where I have to make it, I have to sell it to a third-party distributor, who then sells it to a third-party retailer, from whom you then, can buy it as a consumer.
So you've
and
got markups along the way.
It drives the
obviously.
price. It drives the
Right.
cost of the product up considerably.
And the efficiency isn't there.
Forget the carbon footprint. To put it in perspective, the ice plant, who's one of our largest, accounts, because of obviously all the business that happens in that building, and they're so gracious to pour our spirits and feature us. In 2019, I did a quick math. The bottles that we make on one side of the building, because of our distributor partnership, they go from the south side of the building to Jacksonville, to Tampa, back to Jacksonville, to the north side of the building. And I did the math to count the number of cases and bottles. And in 2019, the combined bottles that just the ice plant bought was 2.1 million miles to move those bottles one floor
Are you kidding? Just to go down the hall and up the stair?
2.1 million miles.
That's ridiculous.
It's government. And it's the fact that you have these antiquated laws that are very entrenched, and again, being very respectful to my industry partners, they don't want any of that to change. And it's a difficult position for them. I get it. What we just look at is like, hey, this is so unnecessary. There has to be a way where we can make this work, because it's worked in the wine industry. Charles, 2 blocks away from me, he can self-distribute his products. Nobody gets hurt. He can ship his products. Nobody gets hurt. And his company's flourishing. And we're really struggling right now just because we don't have those privileges. So, yeah, to answer your question or confirm, I've been very, very involved at the state and federal levels trying to advocate for more, liberties for craft distillers and consumers, because they're the ones ultimately who are losing.
Do you feel like your advocacy, I know it's on a different level and with different things, but do you feel like your advocacy at the local level was easier or harder than at the state and federal level?
It was different. I mean, I think it's easier in the sense that you're not fighting these huge, multi-billion-dollar special interests who are trying to protect their interests, which I get, and it's big business. And so you're fighting just at different scale. I mean, the battle on a local scale was one of education and kind of finding common ground, but because you were closer to home, and you could say, well, if we work together, we can just make this thing happen, and everybody wins. The kids win, the county wins, the city wins, we win as families who wanted it. And it was relatively much easier lift, even though it seemed a lot at the time. And this puts, advocacy and change on a whole new level, and it's a much longer battle.
Do you have to hire lobbyists, or do you go in yourselves to do that? And because you must be up against lobbyists from the big businesses.
So, yes, we hired lobbyists up until COVID because I ran out of money to pay them. But we had lobbyists from 2012 until this past March, and we've had to suspend our services with them. But and I've learned to become a lobbyist in my own right.
I bet you have.
Yeah, sure. And you kind of understand, how things work, and how, how to, people, lobbying is a dirty term. It's really educating. It's really what it is. It's a combination of educating, the members, because you think about it, they're in Tallahassee, specifically in the state. They're in Tallahassee for 60 days. Everybody in the world wants something when they're there, right? They're trying to get this changed or that changed or whatever. There's like 2,000 bills that get submitted. And I want to say on average, maybe 100 or 200 actually get passed during sessions. So it's like drinking from a fire hose. So what the lobbyists have to do is, in a very short period of time, Karen, educate them in snippet bites to say why this is good or this is not good.
Well, I think lobbyists have made it a dirty word by the way that some of them operate. Whereas when you're going as the person who is actually asking for this change,
Sure.
It's a very different perspective that you're bringing.
Definitely. I mean, if we ask for it, it makes sense. If the lobbyists ask for it, it can make sense depending upon the lobbyist. There's a lot of very good lobbyists. The issue becomes is money. I mean, at the end of the day, I've gotten to the point where I think our system on some levels is, needs change, because to be able to get access to some of these folks and to be able to actually get in their ears and get their attention, it's kind of sad because on one hand, and it's not just in this state, it's everywhere. It's in Washington. I always define, people who serve in an office as one of two people. They're either public servants or they're politicians. And when anybody asks me, "Are you going to support my campaign or whatever?" I say, my first question is, why do you want to serve? What do you mean, serve? Why do you want to get on? Well, I don't know. Are you going to serve? Or are you like on a career path to become like a professional lifetime politician? And after 10 years, I've kind of sniffed it out, and you kind of know who's who. And I generally, I tend to support people who I believe have the best interest of their communities at heart. And it's a difficult thing, but we won't go down that path. But there's a lot of great people in Tallahassee who are working, and there's some people, they're all good. It's just a question of what's their personal goal, and it makes a challenge. The system is definitely challenged right now.
Phil, I have to ask you, with all of the advocacy that you've done at different governmental levels, and I know you've become pretty involved in politics, probably by default, maybe not necessarily because you wanted to. Have you given any thought to running for office at any point?
I'm
sure you get asked.
I thought about it. Yeah, I've thought about it numerous times, and I think that I probably would pass on it because I think I can be more effective working outside of the system. I talked to many candidates who have helped run and then get elected and stuff, and I want to say it was Don Critchlow. In 2002, there was this whole big change. It was Critchlow and Jones and maybe Larry. I can't remember. There was another one, but there were three commissioners. George Gardner. There were three of them who
Len
right.
It
was a big and dramatic shift in the city county.
Yep.
And we fought hard because we were relatively new to the community and we wanted change. So now we want things the same. It's funny. But I remember asking Don like a year after he got on the commission. I said, "Well, is it what you expected?" And he said, "It's nothing like I expected." And he said, "The hardest part for me is because of sunshine. I can't talk to my fellow commissioners."
Yeah.
And he said, I got on the board because he was an architect, obviously, still is. And he said, my goal was to, minimize the lot aggregation. I don't want people to, change the landscape because I want to protect the architecture that we have, particularly in Davis Shores. There's some beautiful homes over in Davis Shores that are kind of, these old 50s ranch style, and the lots are on 35-foot lots. And it would have been very easy for a developer to come in, buy the home for $1 million, tear it down, and put up three, matchstick kind of houses and make a bunch of money. And Don was fighting against that. And he said, my problem, Philip, is the very reason I got on the commission. I can't talk to any of my commissioners about.
Yeah.
And I spend all of my time talking about other things like, budgets and pensions and all these other things. They're all important, but he said it takes me away. It's nothing like what I expected. So I think the frustration, I think if you're going to serve, I think generally you should certainly spend time, on some other boards first, so that you can understand what it's like to have to be on the camera, under light, making decisions, saying yes to one person, saying no to another, and dealing with that. Because there's a real art to that. And before you kind of step up in the big leagues, as a city commissioner, for example, I would strongly encourage anyone to serve on HARB or to serve on P&Z or whatever it is, just so you kind of get used to that. So I think I would rather kind of stay on the sidelines and maybe help kind of sharpshoot or laser point certain issues that are important to me personally, because I can do those and I can talk to the commissioners separately and kind of find out where they are and advance things, as opposed to being a commissioner and then you can't.
I'm interested
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Although I think you do very well. I'm interested in the fact that you started out as a resident advocate, and while I think you're still a resident of the city of St. Augustine,
for
correct?
Sure. Yeah.
Now you are heavily involved in the tourism industry, and I understand that.
Sure.
How do you think we meet in the middle with those interests? Because I think that the city of St. Augustine is often like this with its residents and its tourism industry, and they really do need to learn to coexist.
Yeah.
How do you think we do that?
Well, I think you first start by recognizing that there's different interests. I think you recognize that both interests are absolutely valid in their presence, and I think what the best thing you could do is to get reasonable, thoughtful, willing people to volunteer on both sides of the aisle to say, let's get together and talk. And let's understand what the issues are so we can help make sure we don't overstep our boundaries, and vice versa, we don't overstep our boundaries so your businesses are hurt. Because at the end of the day, what makes St. Augustine so special is our community, and it's the fact that it is really a living, vibrant city. And to be able to have a viable downtown, while at the same time being able to offer, great things for people to do when they're here, I think it's a very delicate balancing act. But I think you start by bringing, people who care, and people are going to come to the table and put their own stuff aside.
That's the key.
And not be unreasonable. And I think that's the responsibility of, whether it's the neighborhood associations, picking 2 or 3 people who are going to understand the needs but be reasonable, and the same thing on the business side. That's what I would do.
Good advice. Well, Phil, I feel like I could have filled 3 or 4 hours with you, but I thank you for your time coming
pleasure,
in.
Karen. Thank you for
I'm
having me.
I'm so impressed with all of the work that you've done in the community. We're grateful for that. And I hope that you have other ideas that we see come to fruition here.
I hope so too. We're going to get past this crazy COVID times we're in, and move forward. But yeah, I definitely have other things I want to do. It's such a great city. I love living here. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. And it's our turn. I always feel like there's a chance. You spend the first part of your life benefiting from what others did, and then it's your turn to kind of do that for others. And so it's the pay it forward kind of thing. So I just hope I keep getting a chance to do that, and I love working with wonderful people in the city.
Maybe your next project, because we're both swimmers, is we get a big lap pool in the city of St. Augustine.
Or at least get a
open
heater.
year-round.
Or at least get a heater.
With lots of laps.
Right,
Lots of lanes, I should say.
Exactly.
Maybe that's a good project
I'm down
for
with
us.
that. Absolutely. Number 2. All right. Thanks, Karen.
All right. This has been another episode of the St. Augustine Chronicles, the where, the who, and the how'd they get there. Watch, like, or follow us on Facebook at St. Augustine Chronicles Podcast or at SA Chronicles. You can also find us on YouTube at St. Augustine Chronicles Podcast. Watch, listen, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. We're produced by Patrick Osteen at Pete Melfi's The 904 Now Studio, so you can also find us on the 904 Now Facebook page and be on the lookout for new shows dropping every Monday. Thank you.